That be seated is great. Good morning. I'm totally gonna embarrass someone real fast because he'll hate me doing this. But how many of you were slightly jealous of Julio's pants this morning? Did you see him? I'm picking on Julio. Es pantalones es muy bueno. Did I do that right? Was that close, Myra? I said something about your pants being very good, right? Okay. I may have said something else. I'm not fully sure. I was jealous. My wife said, hey, do you want to get some of those? And I said, I'm going to ask him afterwards. Man, I want some. You'll have to go see them later, all right? So if you don't know Julio, it's a great chance to get to know him. Good man right there. I tell you what, yesterday we had the prayer about it, but the news filled up with the shooting in El Paso. And then wake up this morning with the news of another shooting, Dayton, Ohio. Part of me wants to say, what in this world is this world coming to? And part of me knows that the writing has been on the wall. In some ways, we are doing it to ourselves. In some ways, we are simply letting it happen. And I struggle with that. Because I look, so often I view the problems as out there or far away or distant. And sometimes in your own state, you're like, well, that's closer, but Texas is big, El Paso is pretty far away. But then whenever I read that the shooter was in our neck of the woods, it's where he came from, it's where he graduated high school, it's where he's enrolled in college. That hits home a little bit stronger. It's not that it's any less if they're in Dayton, Ohio or anything like that. It's just something becomes more real. See, I read of a story. Sometimes how unreal it feels. I read of a story about a 28-year-old woman. She was working a late shift and was coming home after her shift. It was about 3 a.m. whenever she shows up in her to her home. She parks and starts walking on the sidewalk to her house. She notices a man in the shadows, and it kind of gives her pause, as it should at 3 a.m. The man starts to come toward her. She runs to her car. She doesn't make it. The man overtakes her and starts stabbing her. I don't know the whole story of what's going on. I just know that he's stabbing her. She cries out, help, I'm stabbed, being attacked. Lights come on in the house beside, and the window goes up, and a gentleman yells, leave that lady alone. So the attacker walks away. The window closes, the light goes off, and the woman is still there. The attacker comes back and attacks again. This time she yells, I'm dying, I'm dying. Other lights come on, other windows open, neighbors holler. The attacker gets in his car and leaves. The woman still on the sidewalk. She crawls to her door. She doesn't really make it because the attacker then comes back and a third time finishes the job. In attacks that last about an hour in length, not one neighbor came outside to help. Now, by the third attack, someone at least called the police. They were there within a matter of minutes, but it was too late at that point. Neighbors were interviewed. Said, why didn't you do anything earlier? The most common response was simply, we didn't want to get involved. How sad is that? But that's the story of our lives, isn't it? Now, you might think, well, Mitch, I'm different. My neighborhood is different. If that happened here, it would be very different. For one, it wouldn't happen here. We're not having stuff like that. But if it did, I would go out. I would make sure of that. Well, that may be the case. If someone screams out that they're being murdered, you might. But what about other brokenness and other hardships that are happening in our neighborhoods? See, a lot of times we get this picture that our neighborhoods are good, they're doing fine, all good kids, and we don't ever realize that some of these good kids are struggling. Some of these good people, at least on the surface, are really struggling inside, and they're going to do some incomprehensible things. But we don't want to get involved. We don't really want to do anything. Because we kind of want to treat people as we would want to be treated, which is hands off. Stay away from us. Let us be our own, live our own lives. Didn't always used to be that way. We used to be a whole lot more involved in people's lives. But it's almost like we have forgotten that there is poverty in our neighborhoods. Pretty much anyone who's trying to make ends meet, a single income family on a government paycheck, they're going to be in poverty. They're going to struggle. Or if it's not that kind of struggle, maybe it's substance abuse. We know that happens in plenty of our neighborhoods. Maybe it's spouse abuse, child abuse. Basically what I'm saying is our neighborhoods are pretty broken. And as people, as the body of Christ, we may not be doing tons about it. We may not actually be going out into our neighborhoods the way that Jesus would call us to, the way that we are called to affect this world. Now, some of you might be thinking, whoa, Mitch, what happened to that nice fun-loving series with Winnie the Pooh and friends? Well, I'm getting there. Because you see, this is not a unique thing. One of the things I love about Winnie the Pooh, and I'm learning about other children's artists and writers, is that they can bring up very deep, hard truths and present it to kids. We were given a series of books. I can't remember the author's name right now, but dealing with that fantastically as well. But one of the things that happened in 100 Acre Wood is it got changed. It got changed whenever two new people moved in to the wood, a single mother and her son. You might know them as Kanga and Roo. And when they moved in, Rabbit wasn't too excited. A little nervous about this. In fact, I want to show a little video clip of this just because I really like showing videos. So here you go.
Winnie the Pooh has many great friends. Come now, and you'll see a story about how he made another. One autumn day, Rabbit was quite excited to see that someone new had arrived in the 100 Acre Wood and appeared to be moving in. So he gathered the others together to see who this someone might be, only to find that this someone was actually two someones.
Roo? Roo, dear?
Here I am, Mama.
It's an invasion.
You think they're fierce? What does fierce look like? That's what fierce looks like. She swallowed him whole. He'll be eaten for sure.
Are you all right?
Don't eat me!
Why, you must be Piglet. I'm Kanga, and somewhere around here is Baby Roo.
I'm not a baby. See? I can do this.
Oh!
It's very nice of you to go out of your way to welcome us.
Oops. Sorry.
Oh, Roo. Piglet, it's almost breakfast time. Would you like to come in for a little bite, perhaps?
I do like the sound of the taste of that.
It didn't take very long for the friends to realize how very nice Kanga was. And with Rabbit, Roo appeared to be making quite a splash.
Let's do it again. This is a fun game.
Oh.
Hello, dears.
Mama, look at me.
Roo!
I like you, Rabbit.
I like you too, Roo.
So, in short time, they all became the very best of friends and remain so to this day, all in a place called the 100 Acre Wood.
See, even in 100 Acre Wood, people have to learn how to be a good neighbor. At first, they wanted to devise a plot to get rid of this invasion, Kanga and Rue. And I have to say, sometimes we're not much better. See, being a good neighbor is not just good advice. It's actually of utmost importance. In fact, Jesus would even call it of greatest importance. He would even talk about how this is something that is the great command. Matthew 22:36, someone came up to Jesus one day and said, "Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" Now, this was actually a big debate of the time. There were over 600 laws in the Old Testament, and people wanted to know, hey, which ones, if I had a pecking order, how do you sum it up? How would you categorize? And any teacher worth his salt would be able to tell you what the greatest command is. And that's what they asked Jesus. They want to know, is he legit? Does he know what he's talking about? So Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." Now, no one would have issue with what Jesus said right here. In fact, all of them would agree. And in fact, several times in Scripture, whenever this is repeated, you see the teachers of the religious law agreeing with this assessment. This is what it's about. Love the Lord your God. Everyone, especially the religious elite, are pretty sure that they're loving God. But Jesus goes on to explain. He goes on to talk about it. He says, you know what? That can't fully encompass it. The second one is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based upon these two commandments. This is whenever Jesus goes from just a good teacher to now starting meddling in your business. This is whenever he's meddling in the things of how you live every day. You can love God in theory, but it's really hard to theoretically love your neighbor. So if you can't theoretically love your neighbor, then the equation is you really can't love God in theory. But you can fake some people out, but you can't fake your neighbors out. Now, some of us might ask, well, love my neighbor, that seems pretty easy. I know who my neighbors are. I mean, it's the people that live beside me, right? Well, that's true. But see, one man coming to Jesus after hearing this says he wanted to justify himself. Maybe he just wanted to understand a little bit better about what Jesus was talking about whenever he says, love your neighbor as yourself. So he says this. He said, who is my neighbor? I feel like I should do a little dance or something. I don't know. I'm wondering what that one is. The man asked, who's my neighbor? After hearing the first and second command, all right, who is it? Jesus then replied with a story. Luke 10:30. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, and when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A Levite, or a temple assistant, walked over, looked at him lying there, and he also passed by on the other side. Then, not any Samaritan, just a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn where he could take care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay it next time I'm here. Now, which of the three would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same, or go and do likewise. Jesus here not only defines who a neighbor is, but also he defines what being a neighbor, what loving our neighbors actually looks like. See, it's not simply about loving those who are closest to us, although that should count. But in this story, I want you to recognize that it is a Jewish man that is hurt, that has been attacked, and it was the Jewish brothers that passed by him. In fact, it is it is possible that they all lived in the same town. It is even possible that this priest, Levite, and the Jewish man lived on the same street in the same neighborhood. That's all possible in the story because they're all brothers. Yet they didn't do what needed to be done. It took the despised Samaritan, the foreigner, the one who's not from around here, to paint us a picture of who our neighbor is. Part of what Jesus is saying here, I believe, is our neighbor is anyone that needs love that is in your path. Anyone. They don't have to live here. They don't have to be around here, from here. They're not from these parts. That's fine. It's not like the old salsa commercial of get a rope. You know, we don't treat them like that, but just because they're not from around here, we love them no matter where they're from, no matter who they are, because Jesus says that's our neighbor. The person that is in our path that needs some love, needs some help, that's our neighbor. Now, we often define neighborly as being a quiet thing. Have you ever bought a house and a realtor says, this is a quiet neighborhood? Usually that's a selling point because people don't want neighbors who are loud. I've come to the place where maybe I am the loud one. I want a little bit more loudness in my neighborhood. Maybe not the stereo thumping and things like that, but it may be. Because that at least shows me that there's some life happening and there's some entry points. Even if I have to go over, knock on the door and say, look, my girls are trying to sleep. Can we turn it down? You know what just happened? I crossed their path. You know what happens in my quiet neighborhood? We don't even say hi to each other sometimes. We give the neighborly nod. You got it, right? Oh, we know we might even give the wave. Might even do, the different fingers. You know all the, not that finger. Hold on 1 second. If you just do the one finger, it's, how's your mom? 2 fingers, it's how's your family? Have you ever? Okay, never mind. Regardless, the thing is, we might do that from a distance and not say a word to each other, and we think that's neighborly. Now, there's some aspects in which leaving people alone is extremely nice and neighborly. But there are some things that go on in our neighborhoods that we should not be silent about, that we should not just sit on the sidelines. In fact, Jesus is giving us permission to get involved in people's lives and say, look, how are you doing? How are things going? I heard that. I heard this. And do you need someone? Now, that may sound weird. It may be difficult. But what Jesus is saying is anyone that comes across your path that needs some help, needs some love, that's going to be your neighbor. It doesn't matter if it's a wealthy entrepreneur that's having marital problems, or if it's the illegal immigrant who is trying to make a life here. Chances are, you are probably a whole lot more comfortable with the first option than the second. You're probably a whole lot more comfortable helping someone, this wealthy entrepreneur that has some marital problems, giving some advice, than you might be comfortable helping an illegal immigrant make a life here. And if so, then maybe Jesus' story about the Good Samaritan needs to be read in your heart. I'm not giving a political stance on what we should do with immigration. What I'm saying is what we should do in Christ is we should love those who are struggling. We should love those wherever we may find them. And believe me, they are on our doorsteps. They are down our streets. They are in our neighborhoods. They are everywhere that we go. And sometimes we're a little scared. Well, what does this mean if I love them? Won't that be risky? I have some neighbors that I was a little concerned about at first. Maybe a little rough around the edges. I don't know how you want to talk about that. I've had some of those neighbors in my life. I've probably been that neighbor to someone else. And you know what I found out whenever I got to know them? Contrary to popular belief, they're humans just like I am. The contrary to popular belief is whether I'm actually human. That could be the question mark. But the thing is, they're people They're struggling people. And sometimes we forget that, and Jesus is giving us the story about a neighbor and how to love others as you would yourself by showing a culture that was completely against another culture, the Jews and Samaritans, and saying, that guy who you demonize showed you love better than you're showing your brothers. We need to be better. We need to step into people's pain, step into their struggle, and love them. In 100 Acre Wood, they had to learn. Kanga and Rue, Kanga wasn't going to eat them. In fact, what they found out, that Kanga was the perfect motherly figure in the story. Her love just like oozes through the stories. Every time she shows up, she just has that love, and you just kind of, you feel good with her. Maybe Paul reiterates this a little bit for us in Galatians 5:14. He says this, for the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Love is the key. But you need to know that love is not just some theoretical concept. It's so much more than just simply saying, I love this. In fact, 1 John 3:11 starts off with this. This is the message you have heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Skipping to verse 16, he says, we know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. So we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need, but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Dear children, let us not merely say that we love each other, let us show the truth by our actions. In other words, love is not simply a word, love is an action. It's not something you do in theory, it's not just something you say about someone, it is something that you do. Or to borrow one more quote, and I love this quote, one day Piglet is struggling with this, and he asked Pooh, he says, how do you spell love? To which Pooh thinks for a second and then says, you don't spell it, you feel it. Love that. Because that's true. I mean, yeah, we know we can spell love, all right? We got that. But the thing is, that's not what you do with love. You don't simply spell it, you don't simply talk about it, you feel it. I wonder how much different our neighborhoods would be if we felt the love. I mentioned two of the shooters, most recent. You name any of our mass shootings or any of the problems that we have going on. What would happen if those people felt love from God's church, from God's people, or from their neighbors? Do you think it would have gotten to the point where it did? Maybe. We can't fix everything. We live in a broken world, and there's brokenness still going to be around, but I bet you we can affect a lot. I bet you we can affect a lot with the grace of God and the power of His Holy Spirit in us. I'm sure that we can make an impression in our neighborhoods so that no one's coming from Sherman who does some atrocious deed. But I think that's only if we are doing our job. If we are loving others and fulfilling the greatest command so that others feel the love that we have for them. May we be the kind of people that don't just talk about love, that don't just talk about, oh, we should love one another and we should love God, and that's good things, but we're the kind of people that anyone that comes in our path, anyone that comes across us, feels our love. Not just in theory, but for them. Some of you are going to have a hard time putting this in practice. You're going to think, all right, Mitch, how do I do this? I mean, if I go to the grocery store, what do I do to the grocery clerk that makes them feel my love? Be careful, because you don't need any lawsuits or anything like that. But the thing is, a smile, a conversation, a little extra time whenever they're going a little bit slow, you have some measure of grace. Believe me, people feel love whenever they get grace. Or maybe practically speaking, a whole bunch of us are probably going to head out to lunch this afternoon here in just a little bit. And you might go to a restaurant for lunch, and there might be someone working that restaurant at lunch that has a stereotype of church crowd, because we have created the stereotype, that they do not like working on Sunday lunch because we people are horrible, horrible patrons. What would it look like if today you changed that? You gave them a little glimpse of what God's love really should be, because they are now your neighbor. It's someone that you've come across and they might be struggling. Some of them are single moms trying to make ends meet. Some of them are college students who we know have no money. Some of them are just struggling in life, and you have love to share. It doesn't mean you're without struggles. It just means we can share with one another. So I don't know what it means for you today, but I'm going to challenge you to go and love your neighbor. If that means literally walking across the street with some baked goods for someone, great. If that means going out of your way to bless the cashier in the longer line that seems to just getting frustrated and you just come and bless their day, great. Whatever God puts in front of you, that's your neighbor. Love them. And this morning, if God has put a neighbor around you that is hurt, that is broken, that is struggling, don't leave this morning without loving on them, to make sure that they feel the love, not just yours, but of God, because that's what a church family should be selling. We should be giving to others. So this morning, if you are in need of some of that, if you're in need of the love of one another, then reach over just to someone and say, hey, can we talk? Go find one of the elders and ministers surrounding this auditorium, or if you want to make it public, come forward. Whatever you may need, the invitation's for you. Would you come as we stand and as we sing together?